I think it's already third public lecture. I would like to inform that the lecture is being recorded. So the lecture is part of the Vilnius University Gender Research Seminar Series, and the series are organized by Feminist Politic and Critical Theory Research Group at the Institute of International Relations and Political Science, and Thinking Motherhood Research Group at the Faculty of Philology in Vilnius University. My name is Ieva Balčiūnė. I'm a PhD candidate of history at Lithuanian Institute of History and Vilnius University, and today I will moderate the event. So already half a year ago, I had an opportunity to spend some time at Warsaw University, Faculty of History, where I met Professor Dobrochna Kałwa in person. So Dobrochna Kałwa probably is well known for those in Lithuania who research gender studies, women's history, social history in the Eastern and Central Europe. Especially historians, I believe, inevitably come across her work. So Dobrochna Kałwa is a historian. She's an assistant professor at Warsaw University, and her research interests include gender history of 19th and 20th century East Central Europe, theory of oral history, women's migration in contemporary Europe, collective memory of women's movements in Poland, and she's author and co-author of many books. For me personally, Dobrochna's research from the start of my PhD studies was an inspiration, and she provides many valuable insights. So it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Dobrochna Kałwa to all of you. I'm sincerely happy that it is possible to have her here. Today, she is going to give a lecture called Women's History in Contemporary Feminist Debate in Poland. I believe that it will be valuable not only for historians who are more or less always witnessing a brutal use of historiography or even quasi-history for different purposes, but to all researchers working on women, gender topics in different academic fields. So please, Dobrochna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eva, for the introduction, and thank you for having me on your seminar. I'm really glad to be the first time in Vilnius, unluckily online, but I hope we will meet somehow and in future personally. So I decided to talk about a special kind of the use of history, because it's not a lecture about what happened in the past, but it is about amazing phenomenon that has happened, still is happening in Poland. That means history of women's history became a politically important, and it is used in many public debates. And in many ways, we can find signs of the women's past in the public discourse. So I will talk about it mostly. And there's a special kind of interconnection between historiography, feminist studies, and especially her story, which is quite new, brand new phenomenon that really takes over everything. So everybody, if they think about the women's past in Poland, right now they use the term her story, not historia kobiet. Women's history is a little bit old-fashioned, traditional, and not so sexy in a way if you think about it. So let me put the my presentation. It's for me easier to talk about this phenomenon. One thing is I would like to mention, this is the problem of my professional perspective. As a historian, I am used to talk about something that is over. So I know the final result, I know the aim or the final goal of the events. Here it is a sort of an ongoing history. I don't know what will happen in the future, what will happen in few years. So, but what happens in meantime, because the subject I'm interested in. I have been observed for years, and also I was not only a researcher but also an active participant of many of these events. So in a way, I'm a historian and a time witness in the same time. And right now, I think that if I talk about it, the title is a little bit changing. So Her Story Matters turned to Her Stories Matter, and I will talk about it a little bit more in this lecture. Here is my structure. I really like doing table structures, graphs. So this is my new concept of how to map out the use of women's past in contemporary Poland. 2 years ago, when I thought about it, there was one element missing, because of course there is a historiography, which is the field I know the best, and this is the real place of knowledge production about this factography oriented knowledge. So who, what did, and when, and where. And historiography has a very long tradition in Poland. What I also mentioned here, that the historiography is perceived and expected to compensate the lack of knowledge. So historians are supposed to look for the facts and establish the certain and rather theoretically neglected knowledge. What is also a part of the historiographical area in Poland, the majority of historians who did women's history were rather, how to say it, they were suspicious about gender in general, but also in general they were suspicious of implementing theory to historiographical work. So this is a little bit, I think that this is common for many of historiographies in post-communist area, but in that case, gender became suspicious about making a false, ideologically, ideologically changed picture of the past, which is not true, which is a sort of not objective, etc., etc. So we can have all these arguments against gender and feminist oriented research on women, but still historians are the best in finding facts, finding information that can be used. Since the 90s, we see also a sort of difficult, more or less, relations with the feminist-oriented studies, gender studies, which are right now much more interesting in terms of doing research on the past. And of course, gender studies are really strongly embedded in theories, especially Western knowledge, Western ideas of how to do studies in gender. In queer right now, it is much more evolving. And what is also quite interesting, that gender students are much more in connection with the international discourse. They know how to use this global knowledge about the past, but also global knowledge about theories and tools which might be useful to do women's and gender and queer history here. But there is also another problem with this gender studies approach. It is much more about fulfilling knowledge of the Western or global knowledge about the region. So usually the questions and the fields of research come out from the Western global discourses. We are not so good in inventing and promoting questions which rose here in this very specific region of the territory between West and East. So this is what happens with the gender studies, but right now it is also changing, and I see that there is a sort of a new trend to be much more critical about using and implementing Western concept and trying to find out something much more useful for this region. The third element of this map is her story. This is something which is her story won the field of the past in Poland in the last 5 years. And I see how even in academic discourse, the term her story replaces historiography. So this is quite interesting how this her story, the term which comes from quite different concept, is really, really popular right now. For example, I am very often presented in many conferences or events organized by sociologists or literary students or anthropologists as a historian. So because I'm doing the women's history, obviously I am a historian. But majority of my colleagues who do women's history from feminist perspective, they don't want to be called historians because the aims of her story is a little bit different than even theoretically framed historiography. Because right now in Poland, her story is a political activity with a very clear objective, which is to build the collective identity of feminists or women in Poland. So they use the past to build up their own methodology, their own collective memory, which will be recognizable among feminist activists. Not only, I will talk about it more. What is also quite interesting in the case of her story, which I put in this framework of doing politics of memory and building collective memory of women, is that this is very, very network activity. Networking is the basis, and this is also a quite interesting movement of grassroots movement. It comes from bottom up, and it is obviously a non-academic movement. However, many academics, non-historians are involved in doing her story as an active tool in doing also politics. So it is very ideological on the one side, but also very effective tool in spreading out some feminist ideas and also knowledge about women's past. So very effective, very non-academic, but there are also some criticism about what's going on with historiography and with academic knowledge in this use and also abuse of the knowledge of the past. And the fourth element I mentioned him, and I added just this week when I thought about the lecture and our meeting. This is the feminist marketing, because for a while I put many of the things, many of the phenomena and outcomes of women's activity to this her story part. But right now I can see how the her story, but also historiography, can be turned to a business, can be turned to a commercial success. And it also happens right now. And because of this part, we can see also how marketing is important in making women's history visible. So that's why I put here visibility as the main aim, of course, except of doing money and having this financial success of women involved in this kind of practices. I also put it here right now because I think we usually don't think about money issues when we talk about activity doing feminism. We of course all use some grants and we apply for money, but usually we don't think about it as a path to have a financial success, and that is happening right now in Poland as well. So let's start with the historiography. Of course, if I would be correct, it would be not just 10 covers of the books, but just several pages of bibliography with the text and books which were published on the women's history in last 10, 12, 20 years in Poland. Here, I put them in two lines. The first one is a little bit tricky because the books published by here, they are written not by historians. So even the book Kobiety, Historia, Women and History is edited and conceptualized by non-historians. This is the edited book, and what is really paradoxical, I was the only historian invited to write an article for this book, because history is not anymore the property of historians, if it ever was a property of historians. Non-historians who are usually feminist oriented, they are very good in putting questions and building up an interesting fields of debate, of contemporary debate, because they are not so, how to say it, they are not slaves of typical historiographical knowledge. So they look in a little bit different way on historical events and historical phenomena, and they also offer a little bit different answers, which usually are rejected by historians due to different kind of problems with this kind of knowledge. For example, Damy rycerze i feministki, one of the most famous and most important books for building up the historical discourse on women and emancipation in Poland, was written by a philosopher, Sławomira Walczewska. She's also a very significant and known feminist activist in Poland, and she just did a huge comparison of the practices, emancipating practices of women in last 2 centuries, building also quite controversial from historical perspective comparison between women's activity and agency in the mid-19th century and the time of the solidarity in Poland. None of historians can do this in this way. We don't do this kind of comparison, just jumping from the mid 1860s to the late 20th century. So therefore, this part of the book, comparative book, is a little bit suspicious for most of the historians. Of course, Walczewska didn't write a book how it happened and what happened in the past. She just analyzed a discourse on emancipation. So in that way, I think that the book is inspiring and refreshing the way how we think about the women's emancipation in Poland. There is also quite important, and the book which opened up a new perspective on Warsaw Uprising. This is the book by Weronika Grzebalska, Płeć Powstania Warszawskiego, the gender of Warsaw Uprising, when she just asked about women who were in both home army fighting against Germans, and of course women were in Warsaw during the uprising and they had their own experiences. Grzebalska conducted some interviews with former female members of home army and asked about their participation in the uprising. And she also in her book followed the discourse and the way how gender order was perceived and structured by the Polish home army and underground during the Second World War. And she also saw how these gender roles were practiced during this time. The book was controversial because of the tools Grzebalska used to make an analysis. She is a sociologist, and so she looked at the historical sources, historical evidence in a very non-historical way, because the historical context was not so important. However, despite all the things that make me historian a little bit irritated, she made some very important conclusions, and she also opened up a huge debate about the war experiences, but also the hierarchy of roles during the war. One of the questions that came up because of the book, why we find fighting with a rifle, so why we find this kind of activity during the war much more important than, for example, feeding the soldiers. So there were much more about the book was not only an offer of the explanations of the book doesn't offer all answers, but raises up new questions, and that obviously influenced the discussion. And the book Zerwana genealogia is quite interesting. This is also a sociologist, Magdalena Grabowska, who just proposed another interpretation of the post-war women's movement, which was obviously legalized by the communist authorities. But she, in a way, broke up with this thinking about women involved in legal women's movement in communist Poland as somebody who didn't want to be emancipated. So, in a way, she started a debate which rose because of the anti-communist roots of Polish feminism in the late 80s. There are also quite interesting and very important actions to publish the sources and publish the voices of women. And this is both the book Chcemy całego życia, which is just an edition of the sources and evidence of the Polish emancipatory and feminist movement in the 19th and 20th century, but also a book by Ewa Kondratowicz, which is a sort of following up project of collecting interviews with women involved in solidarity. So we can see that not only historians, but also people from different kind of disciplines can find doing history very important and very interesting. Kobiety, Historia, this book I mentioned in the beginning, it is a collection with a very interesting essays based on literature and analyzing the cultural aspects of women's past. So obviously non-historians focus on discourses, and this is the field of their knowledge and expertise. Historians are much more, how to say, traditional. I don't like this word, but usually they try to focus not on discourse, but much more about the everyday practices, strategies, and events that happened around women. Here is the book Kobieta i społeczeństwo, only one of them. This is a historical canonical series, really old-fashioned in a way, and I see that right now it's probably a little bit forgotten. In the 90s, the historians from Warsaw, but not only, started to make a sort of additional publications of articles concerning women in history of women in the 19th and 20th century. The person who was in charge and who was responsible for this event, which ended up with 10 volumes, it was Anna Żarnowska, who is, she died 10 years ago, so she was and she's still godmother of the Polish women's history, because she started the conferences and then she build up a network of historians who were invited by her, but also encouraged to support and promote young female students doing women's history. And Żarnowska was also important, right now she's really important because one of the few objects of her research were women workers. So she was also interested in intelligentsia and elites of emancipation, but she also knew and did research on female workers and about the situation condition in the 19th century. Thanks to her and Andrzej Żarnowski, a collaborator of Żarnowska, Andrzej Schwarz, there was also a collected volume, Równe prawa, nierówne szanse, Equal Rights and Equal Chances, about situation of women in the Second Republic. This was a sort of a starting point to develop the history of women in Poland in the 20th century. So obviously there were some fields and areas of special interest. Kobieta i społeczeństwo, Women and Society, was mostly interested in social history. So there are plenty about education and culture and women's organizations. It's really quite interesting right now and evidence what were historians' interests in doing history in the 90s and in the beginning of the 21st century. But for example, posłanki and senatorki, this book belongs to the field of history of women's activity in political fields. Of course, this field is quite important, and there are plenty of research right now concerning women's participation in political parties or in political movements like Solidarity, for example. But of course, this field is still open up to new field, and we have to do much more to fulfill this gap, because it's easier to research biographies and activity of MPs or senators because this is the elites of political area. We know much less about this local activities and doing, for example, municipality. One of the key issues and key fields of the historical research, this is the situation of women in the post-war Poland, especially in the 50s. I'm not quite sure how it is in other countries, but I think that the time of Stalinism is really, really well researched, because it's very visible as something different from today and from the past, and there are plenty of quite attractive sources to be analyzed. So Stalinism is the time really well researched. However, there is also a question to what extent the propaganda, discourse and practice are intertwined, and right now we do much more research on looking at women's activity and life under Stalinism from their own perspective. This is something that is much difficult to be researched than to read the central documents of the party and to see and analyze how the party and how the communists wanted to see women's role and activity. In a way, we see how multi-layered and how not so obvious situation of women in post-war Poland. Now we can see in a book which was published a year ago, maybe in 2020. This is the book Kobiety w Polsce, 1945-1989, which is a story of women's situation in this area in Poland, prepared by 4 historians. I know that they right now are finishing to prepare the German translation of the book, so it will be also available in German. And this book is, as I find very interesting because it also shows how different historians look at the past, how they problematize history of women, what kind of stories can be used to show complexity of women's emancipation and also entering the modernity. And they really difficult to describe in one sentence attitude towards socialism and the communist regime. So I really strongly recommend, if somebody speaks Polish or reads Polish, it's good to read some of the articles there put it. So also it's quite interesting because this is also a perspective of Polish and non-Polish historians with quite useful bibliography, up to date. This is the most recent work on the communist time in Poland. We still don't have a historiographical synthesis of women's history. So in a way, this book, Kobiety w Polsce, is a result of the project to write down a synthesis, a huge history of women in Poland. But historians are very suspicious about doing synthesis before doing monographs. So there are too many things we don't know to just offer this kind of long-term history of women in Poland. And many of non-historians accuse us for lack of this work. So I think that this is the future. So probably it will come sooner than I expect, this kind of good and interesting and professional synthesis of history of women in Poland. These books are, of course, not all of them, and I will show another kind of knowledge production that shapes and establish right now the vision of the women's past. But I also would like to tell a little bit about the historical booms in Poland. At least two, I think, must be mentioned. 2016, this is another debate on abortion law in Poland, because for me, the post-communist time and history of women and feminism in Poland is cut to the pieces by the ongoing debate, returning debates on reproductive rights and ongoing limitation of reproductive rights in Poland. So in 2016, the huge debate started because of the idea to make abortion illegal totally. So in that moment, something happened, and I was really surprised by what happened in Poland in October 2016, because of course from the very beginning, from the 90s, during the debates and discussions on abortion law, there were some demonstrations, there were some actions against it, introducing new restrictive laws, but usually there were small groups of feminists who were making noises and were treated a little bit suspiciously by the bystanders, who just saw strange women shouting in the streets, small groups. But here we can see that in Warsaw, there is a really massive gathering of women and men also, who came to the square in Warsaw to protest against the new law. First of all, in this protests, which also happened in other places and other cities and other small towns as well. That's why I put this picture here with this banner Strike Kobiet from Suleju, with a really small town, because women went on strike nationally. So it happened everywhere. And this is one point which was quite different from other conflicts. The second one, that in this protest took part older and younger generations. So it was really transgenerational protest. And it was also a protest with participation of women from different classes. So for the first time, I think that women from working class as well took part in the protest, maybe because this protest was organized after 5 p.m. So the women who worked in shops, in markets, they could come and they took part in this event. By chance, during this meeting, this gathering, it was a heavy rain, so everybody had to have umbrellas, and we see not only hats but also umbrellas as an emblem who became much more important to the her historical identity than we could expect it in that moment. The emblem used in the social media and in the public sphere was this white hat of a woman, which for me is a little bit connected with the aesthetics of French Revolution and this way of presenting the heads of Jacobins. I have this kind of impression when I saw this emblem. This meeting was not the only one. There were plenty of them in Warsaw and in Poland. And during this meeting and during this protesting, many new, sometimes unexpected emblems and symbols appeared. And what I found quite interesting, that in many of them we see references to history. Also this nationalist history as well. Cursed Uttery, Macice Wyklęte, is a play with words and play with the myth of cursed soldiers, anti-communist underground movement who became new heroes of nationalist story. And here the women just use this sort of message. And of course, this is very, very obvious and clear for anyone who read this Macice Wyklęte, what is going on here and who is the soldier, who is cursed, etc., etc. Another example of this play with words and plays with symbols is Polka walcząca. So this P with breast, and in many kind of variations to use the very important and very well known, recognized in Poland, symbol of underground movement during the Second World War. The authors of this Polka walcząca, so here's also the play with word, because Polka is a Polish woman, Polska is a Poland, so here we have also information that in effect Poland is a woman. So this is this way of links between the symbols. But the authors of this symbol were caught. They had a trial in the court because they were sued for how to say it. I don't know the English word to for disgrace about the Poland and patriotism. So they were accused for being non-patriot. But something happened, and this symbol went viral and was also used in different way. Also with a quite interesting new figure in this public discourse, dziewucha, which is a sort of a nasty girl, translating to English. So not only women, not only Polish women, but also girls were introduced to the public discourse. And here I like this photo of a woman with this partly patriotic, but partly also a fighter. She's not a typical representation of women in Polish discourse. He's much more aggressive, and this aggression of new generation of women rose during the protests, especially in the 2020. Historical boom had this protesting phase, but also there was a sort of a great celebration. In 2018, one of the fields of celebration of centenary of independent Poland was centenary of women's rights and suffrage. So in that moment, plenty of actions in different cities and different areas appeared. So in each city, there was a celebration concerning centenary of suffrage. There were also quite interesting publications, like a comic book concerning women's rights in the 19th and 20th century, regardless of gender, prepared by the Feminist Foundation STIR. You can see also quite interesting new phenomenon, because in that year, many of women decided to wear historical clothes. So this sort of a play with history and reenactment we know from military history usually was also used by women who just celebrated, but also marched from the different cities and towns. So I find this kind of celebration, which really took place in many towns, cities, and even villages, was a result of ongoing development of knowledge about the women's past and small grassroots actions and initiatives perceived by women on the local level. They knew that they gained rights, and they knew that they were fighters who did it. So this is also a sort of a change in comparison to earlier decades. It was not the story about politicians who gave women rights, but it's also the story about women who were used to fight for them. One of the crucial elements of this change was the film Siłaczki, Strong Women. This is the cadre of the film, with also quite interesting references to historical sources, because in the poster of the film, the author Marta Dzido used the original old-fashioned 20th century poster prepared by the socialists to show that women from working class can vote and can win with the capitalism as well. Marta Dzido is one of the significant authors and artists for the feminist movement in Poland, because she did also several years earlier film Solidarity According to Women. It was a story about women from Solidarity movement. She spoke to them, and she also presented a story of a woman who was forgotten. So she was in the strike in Gdańsk in 1980, and then she was forgotten. And she's also a quite interesting example of a history of women in the times of transition. So the film was quite well received in many places. And what is quite interesting in the case of Solidarity According to Women, this film was received very positively by feminists and also by the right and anti-liberal activists as well. So this was quite astonishing in the case of Solidarity According to Women. The Siłaczki is a little bit different case, because Marta Dzido wanted to prepare this film for the centenary, so she published it in 2018. And this is a film which was produced thanks to the fundraising and thanks to the patronage system, with some actors who just worked for free, but also many of feminist activists who decided and who participated as a crowd in many of the scenes which were here included in this film. What is that also quite interesting, because Dzido wanted to do a documentary film about suffrage. the idea, clever idea, excellent idea. There is only one problem. There is no films, original films on women's suffrage in Poland. So she decided to make a sort of a reconstruction by using the historical sources, historical speeches of many of the feminists, and therefore we know we have a sort of reconstruction, which is also a, how to say it, artistic and not so precise story about the past. This is the story about the great women who are our grandmothers, and we should be proud and we should be like them, very powerful and very well received by non-historians, but much more about the activists, story about being together and fighting together as well. One of the part of the film, for example, was filmed in Krakow. During the protests, women were dressed historically, and they reenacted one of the speeches of the feminists in the 19th century. So it was included also. And here is, so the film, of course, is the most how to say, respectful way of presenting the history, but much more important are books. And here we have the bestseller from the 2018. Anna Kowalczyk wrote a synthesis of history of women in Poland. It is Brakująca połowa dziejów, the missing part of the history. She wrote a popular history of women in Poland. What is quite interesting, she consulted her story with historians, and she also mentioned about historians who helped her to understand what happened in the past, what kind of roles and what kind of activity could women do. Krakowski Szlak Kobiet here, this is not a book, this is a game. You can just play with pawns on emancipation and suffrage in Krakow. Krakowski Szlak Kobiet was also a sort of an initiative which went viral, really, because women from Krakow decided to build up traces and roots on Krakow to show history of women. And you can just visit Krakow and with this story is to see the places where the feminists were active, where was the first co-educative school, was the where the first students used to live, etc., etc. And this kind of ideas, this kind of project was then reproduced in many cities, like in Warsaw, in Łódź, in Poznań, Katowice. So each one of these cities have their own historical route to visit and to see where were women. Nasze Patronki is a little bit different project, because this one is a little bit much more business oriented or business sponsored. One of the most wealthy banks in Poland just sponsored the idea to build up the database of female patrons who can be patrons of schools. So children, students from primary and secondary schools can study the significant women from the past and to introduce them as the patrons of schools. So this is all about emancipation, about the feminist point of view, but in the same time, parallelly, we have a sort of a nationalist, non-feminist her story with feminine heroes of the past. This kind of production happens in many of museums, but also there are publications. All of them are about significant and brave and respectful women. We should cherish and we should follow, but this is also embedded in this rather nationalist and conservative concept of gender and women's emancipation. The titles are quite instructive, because the first row is about girls. It's mostly about young women who were fighting against Germans and communism, those who were Jews and survived the Holocaust or died, those who were helped to hide Jews on the Aryan side, and those who were involved in post-anti-communist movement after the Second World War. All of them are girls, and of course it's quite interesting that the covers are prepared according to contemporary aesthetics norms, not the historical ones, but also it shows that there is a new audience for this kind of stories, young girls, teenagers who are also interested in history. There are also, and this is production by Anna Herbig, who just wrote book after book, which are really commercial project to be sold. The ladies, I put here only three examples of this production, are written by Kamil Janicki, one of the most productive, unfortunately, writer, who I think that he just commercializes the most expected and the most popular trends. So, for example, right now he was publishing a book on the pańszczyzna, so this peasantry in the early modern times. And here is also Women 44, so another book about the women fighting in the Warsaw Uprising. The Warsaw Uprising, I think that since the 2004 became a very important national myth, which is right now celebrated in every country, every region, in every town in Poland. So, and therefore, women were also included in this story and memory of the Warsaw Uprising. The ladies are really, this is really strange stories, very, very conservative, and it is a little bit much more about, from my perspective, about and strengthening traditional gender roles than rather questioning them. So it's mostly about queens and elites. And what is also quite astonishing, because this is the same series, all of them have this sort of subtitles, true stories. So the mythology, which is presented as a true history of women in the past. In the end, which shows that also this kind of emancipation story about suffrage and political rights might be also taken over and included into conservative her story, is the project Podwójnie Wolne, twice free or twice liberated. Here we have the author of the project, a historian, Magdalena Gawin, who wrote a book about emancipation in the 19th century in Poland. Very interesting because very controversial in her conclusions about women and emancipation, but she also could introduce her vision of the emancipation in Poland as a vice minister of culture. So she was in charge and she was able to give money to this kind of project. It was a special kind of exhibition which traveled through all the Poland and in many small towns, presented women who fought for freedom of Poland and also for political rights of women. Here we also have behind Józef Piłsudski as the real father of women's emancipation, and this is something that also happens in this conservative, non-feminist story about the past. This non-feminist story and non-feminist her story strongly underlines that gender is a concept really damaging the women's situation, and it is much more about women who follow the traditional roles, and if they cross the line, it is only temporary because of the needs of nation or the state, and then they became a perfect women, perfect wives, and perfect mothers. Therefore, one of the most important figure of this traditional her story is Aleksandra Piłsudska, the second wife of Piłsudski, who became a sort of a mother of the nation in the interwar time. I think that in Poland, those who are not interested in history professionally, they don't see these nuances between the messages that are here, because obviously this is the tribute to women who were active politically and who worked for the nation. However, I don't know what will be the future of our story about the past. I hope that it will go well because of the growing interest in doing history and growing interest in doing study and history with using such categories like gender and also queer right now. And there is also another trend, I hope, to include to her story and gender history also male agents of the who were involved in changes and dynamics of women's history. So this is all what I want to say, and in the end I would like to show a small trailer of this film Siłaczki, Strong Women, to give you some knowledge how it was produced and what kind of message it sent to many of enthusiastic receivers of this film. So I need to stop here and now another one. Okay.
Siostry. Wskazówka sprawiedliwej miary na zegarze wolności już dobiega godziny wyzwolenia. Czytajcie proszę. Kobieta głośnym protestem odrzuca niewolniczą bierność ślimaczego istnienia. Pierwszy krok do zrzucenia niewoli. Stworzyć się, być wolnym. Pierwszy krok do zwycięstwa to poznać własną siłę. Odważmy się, być wolnymi. Moment dziejowy, który obecnie przeżywamy, jest zbyt doniosłym, byśmy my, kobiety, nie miały zaznaczyć swego stanowiska. My, Polki, nie chcemy być biernymi widzami. Czynu.
Okay, the date of the premiere was
Wydawnictwo Poznańskie oraz Audioteka przedstawiają Bernardine Everisto. Dziewczyna.
Okay. So the date was obviously thought, designed to celebrate also the date of the giving or gaining the suffrage by women, because 28th of November was this time. I really like this film because it's very, very interesting in terms of building some mythology. So you have their umbrellas with which women used to knock the door of the Piłsudski's house. However, in the film, this is a really nice springtime, beautiful weather. November was not so nice in the 1918, of course, but it looks better. And it is a sort of a quite interesting film because the speeches and the texts which are performed there, these are historical speeches and texts written by Polish feminists. So they don't sound well, because this is a manifesto written. However, this film is used by teachers who try to teach about the feminism and Polish suffrage as well. So in that way, the film was quite interesting. Another thing which is in film, that Gido combined scenes from this reconstruction of marches in the 1918 with the documentary shots from the protests in 2018 and 16. So in a way, she shows that women in Poland have to fight again and again, and they are very good in protesting and marching. So this is, and it happened really in 2020 with this idea to make a completely ban on abortion. Young women went to the streets and protested very violently and in a very new way, which surprised many people. So there is something in history that make us more powerful or more, better in protesting. That's all from my part.
Okay, thank you very much, Dobrochna. Now I would like to encourage everyone to submit questions, to use the opportunity to ask, to comment, share your insights, start a discussion maybe. But therefore, I don't see questions yet in the chat section, and I will use just for that. We have 30 minutes, I think, for Q&A session. So yeah. Yes, so as a moderator, I will use this privilege and start the first question. I have put down many of them, but just one at a time. So yeah, well, maybe I'm wrong, but I have an impression that talking about this part of Europe, East and Central part of Europe, like social questions, social problems, and especially the public discussions about it, and the manner in which it is conducted often are explained through the experience of state socialism. Like, for example, I believe that it could be said that not so long ago in Lithuania, as well as in Poland, I think, any historical research on women was considered as almost a statement. And I guess it was so because the women question was the important part of communist agenda. So my question is, do you see how the historical knowledge is being used in public discussions in different regions? For example, in the post-socialist region, with all its traumas of state socialism experience, and the Western Europe or the Catholic South. So are there any specifics or differences in a broader perspective? Yeah. Thank you.
Well, for a long time, I thought that this intense discourse using, well, the discourse, political discourse using strong historical arguments is something very specific for the post-communist areas. But right now, when I look at, for example, what's going on in the United States, for example, we see that history matters, and in different ways. So there is a need, and there is a rather global trend to make a revision of this established vision of the past, so established history based on the winners and based on the powerful agents of the history. Might it be state, might it be nation, or so-called great men who did history. But right now it's much more space for looking at, and people just want to know more about those who are invisible in this overview of the past. So they are not only asked about the winners, but also about the victims and all those who are silenced by the history. So therefore, in a way, national minorities and women and working class are all together with the same need. And it happens not only in Poland, in other countries of the region, but also in the West or in the United States. So the project of the 1918, for example, to rebuild the history of the United States with introduction of the slavery as the main plot is something that is also, for me, quite interesting to see that something is going on globally. And the time when this idea that we don't need history anymore, and this is a sort of a backwarded concept of understanding ourselves, is over. So right now we need to look at history, but also what we can see that history is not just a neutral, objective knowledge about the past, but this is always a project of the perspectives and our choices, what is important, why do we need to look at the past, what kind of future aims we want to gain. Therefore, right now I see that not only conservative movement in Poland use history, but also, for example, new left movement build up their own message and their own stories, including the lower classes or the rejected. So that happens, and I'm really glad about it, because it shows also that there is much to do by us as historians.
Yeah, thank you. So as I see no more questions, so I have another one. So yeah, about this silenced voices or silenced voices. I guess in a historiography and maybe in the other humanitarian social sciences as well, like researching social questions, the goal in a way is to hear those silenced voices, right? And who were forgotten, those people who were forgotten. So especially considering the problems of archival documents, considering gender, women, queer history, one of the most handy source, if possible, are oral testimonies, right? So, however, how do you think, is there a danger for the authentic memories that in the context of all these representations and all these used narratives connected to one or another agenda or to political as well, people start to modify or shape their memories or the articulation of memories to researchers wanting to fit into one or another representation or agenda themselves? So having in mind that the discussion, as you mentioned, for example, about abortion policies are aggressive and are very emotionally involving, would you say that there is a danger that because of this use of historical facts and narratives and in activisms and in public discussions, the oral history method starts to be less and less reliable, less authentic, that we actually may lose the nuances of the people's realities and how they understand it authentically? And if yes, then could it be said that using women's history in public discussions does more harm sometimes from the perspective of a historian, of course?
Well, there is a curse of history as a science or social science or just academic knowledge, that we all have to cope with the fact that everyone has history in schools. So we have to also have in mind that everyone knows something about history. Usually that this is very difficult and boring subject in schools, that you have to memorize facts and dates, etc. So this is something that, for example, sociologists don't have these problems. Nobody knows what sociology is as long as they study them at the university. So if we look at the history at school, so this common knowledge about the past, we know that this is the field of or level of memory, common memory. So we have all this lieu de mémoire, we can build up communication among the members of the same circle of the collective memory. But historiography is a little different. And this is my problem, how to explain that historians do something more than just digging the facts. And what we should do as historians, and this is my new mission or idea, is to teach how to do history by themselves. So this is this sort of idea that don't teach people which book and which paintings are the greatest. Teach them how they can recognize the greatness of the literature of the or the art. That this is the idea how the teachers of history should also work. Teach your students or teach the people who want to do history how to do the work with the sources, what the evidence how the evidence should be analyzed, and how historians go to the conclusions, because this is not that we only read the evidences and we know everything. So this is one part of the answer. Another one which develops slowly, I think not only in Poland, there is the question or the issue of ethical responsibility of historians, that we should be very careful in giving the answers. And also we should be very careful in using such strong words like truth, lies, ideology, because from my perspective, every kind of story about the past is somehow infected by our overviews, our values, our concept of the past, and our fear of the future. So there is nothing about objectivity in history, because we can build up completely different stories from the very same facts and from the very same evidences, and that really happens. In Polish case, I think that this is something, from my perspective, tragic, that this postmodern relativism and this story that every narrative has the same value and is important. It is taken over by the far right and conservative agents of the historiographical and historical debate in Poland. So in postmodern relativism, many of right historians believe, and those who in that moment use the argument that this is not true, the reality was different, and I know the truth, of course, loses this kind of debate, because it goes to nowhere. So it's very, very complex. I think that this responsibility and also making the way how the historical knowledge is produced should be our mission, to show how to do that. Many of her historians, so the women who were involved in finding out information about the past, about the women, because they believed that it was a sort of a patriarchal conspiracy to hide women in the historical narrative, they decided to go to the archives to find women and to write about them. And of course, they failed, because there is no archives, there is no evidences, and obviously many of women did not leave any kind of traces. But this kind of experience was really instructive, and in some of these projects, historical projects, they started to look for different kind of spaces or different kind of activities, usually marginalized. For example, in one of the texts I really like, a woman just visited the cemetery, and she just looked at the photos on the graves and look at the inscriptions on the graves to find out the traces, the evidences of existence of many of women. And the 19th century, this inscriptions are really inspiring to build up kind of stories. This is also, for example, activity based on reproducing activity of women of the past. So there are some kind of groups like a reenactment group doing fashion from the 20s. So they just women's design clothes like in the 20s and 30s, and in that moment try to understand what was going on in the heads and hands of women operating in that past. So it is also this sort of a message. We shouldn't look at the state archive materials, this bureaucratic traces, but also to look for women's presence in different places, different spaces, and it is also invitation to think about the past in different ways. So in that way, her story is also inspirational for professional historians.
Thank you. And we have questions, more questions. So I'm not sure who is asking. Oh yeah, Natalia Arlauskaitė is asking. So her question. Thank you so much for a very interesting talk. Could you please tell a little bit more about Polish historians who explicitly do feminist queer history, not necessarily political history, maybe working on some niche subjects? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. This is something which is really brand new in Polish historiography. So this openness of the especially young scholars to concept of queer and feminist, and from my perspective, the new generation of historians, but also all those academics doing feminist history, they are better. They are aware of theoretical framework because usually they spend some time abroad, they travel to the West, and they are very fluent in using some concept like Butler, for example, which was tabula rasa for the historians in the 90s and 80s. And they try to use this concept also in Poland. Just last week, I had a very interesting discussion with the two young medieval historians who do queer in medieval times. So it happens on our, and I'm really glad because looking at their way of thinking about the evidences and about the questions they rose to this time of the 15th century and also 10th century, they were very also inspirational for me. So I'm really glad that somebody does queer. We also have quite new research on Maria Sadowska. It was a physician in the interwar time who was a lesbian, and she was openly a lesbian, and she tried to fight for her dignity and right to be non-heteronormative woman. But this is a brand new, and many of historical phenomenon, situations, and people can be analyzed more. For example, Maria Radziewiczówna, one of the most patriotic writer, if you look at her pictures and her photos, obviously she was non-heteronormative in terms of performing not femininity but masculinity, and she needs another research what was going on with her. That also appears in many of the stories. So yeah, there is queer, but I think that there is much more queer history concerning masculinity than femininity, but still something's going on. Of course, there is always the problem of the sources of the archives. We have always dig in and look for new documents and just traces of this kind of people. It's not so easy.
Thank you. Another question from Arvidas Koncevičius. Can you please share some thoughts on the so-called pro-life, anti-abortion feminism in general and in the light of Strike Kobiet? Some deem pro-life feminism self-contradictory, while others think it's a sound and consistent notion. Feel free to not to answer if the question seems off the topic or oversimplified. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. In the case of contemporary strikes and also contemporary tensions, because there are plenty of tensions right now in the feminist movement in Poland, I'm only a sort of observer with a little bit limited knowledge what's going on, because I'm not inside the conflicts and quarrels. However, I found it very, very positive that our feminism is strong and large enough to have inside conflicts, because it means that we are numbered and there are different kind of views of the society and rights and equality. Obviously, right now, in the last 5 years, there is much more about transgender and about the discrimination of people, of transgender people, and about this is the key problem that appears right now. And another one is appearing like a sort of another boom in this feminist movement. This is not only abortion, but it's also the sexual abuse, and as a important element of the experience of many of women, and the young generation tries to talk about it. Another thing that happens, I will go back then to this anti-abortion wave. This is the developing tension between generation of feminists from this 19th century, 1990 decade of the neoliberal openness to the Western ideas of liberal feminism, and the younger generation, very often either rightists, either leftists, who are very suspicious about this heroic story of self-made women who achieved successes in the 90s. They are not so, they are much more suspicious also about this mythological concept of women's sisterhood, despite all the distinctions and conflicts. So they have their own story about the past and also about the feminists as well. So right now, I think that there is much more different wings, and also there is a TERF feminism as well. So in a way, we are more and more divided within. I don't know whether it's good or not, but still there's something like that also happens. I don't believe in a homogeneity of any kind of movement, and the more conflicts within, the better for the outcome in the end. And anti-abortion feminism, it's probably not so well. There is a strong movement we don't really take into consideration when we talk about feminism and women's movement. This is the Catholic women's organizations. This is also those women who build up the identity on the concept of this is a new feminism by John Paul II. He introduced this concept showing that women are very important, but they should not abort, etc., etc. But there is plenty about this agency and agency of women and their responsibility and their importance for the political rights. If we look at the political scene in Poland, there is much more powerful and significant women politicians in the right part of the scene than in the left. this is also another paradox of the situation. All the prime ministers who were women, they were not leftist or feminist. They were just conservative, well-behaved, patriarchal female agents of the policy. So there's something like that also happens. So I wish to be a historian in next century, because there is so many interesting historical events right now to be analyzed from the distance, and also with the knowledge about the final outcome of the changes that happens.
Thank you, Dobrochna. So our time is running out. I would like to ask if anyone has more questions. If not, then maybe we should just, say thank you to you, Dobrochna. It was a pleasure, and thanks to everyone who participated. So I hope to see you someday in Vilnius, and to everyone, hope to see you guys in other lectures. Thanks.
Thank you for your invitation, and I wish I could talk with you face to face, not monitor to monitor. So obviously we have to meet in Vilnius someday and to talk openly.